I'm upset. I'm upset, and it is mostly my own fault. I thought for some ungodly reason that the Legendborn series was a duology. I don't know why. I don't know. I heard so many good things about the first one, and I was like, nah, I'm gonna wait. I will wait, and I will finish. I don't like reading series when they're unfinished. I can't. I don't like watching shows when they're unfinished. It's just one of those things. So I don't know why I did this. I don't know why I did this, but I have read the first two Legendborn books, and then I got very near the end of the second one, and I was like, oh no, this isn't gonna end. And that's when I realized that there was a third one coming out in 2024. But here we are, okay? We can all be miserable together. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you've seen this outfit before, no you have not. As I've said in a few of the other videos that I filmed many videos today because I'm awful at filming things promptly, apparently. And so I batch filmed things, so if you've seen this outfit, oh well. I have on my channel a few other videos coming up in this outfit about judging your first lines and other first lines in popular books and media with my lovely new thing that I've entitled The 5 First Line Lessons of Literary Lust, which is incredibly hard to say. So if you have first lines that you would like me to judge, the link is in the description below for my first line submissions. So do it if you want. I will talk about them. I will be very kind, but we will just explore them, talk about what makes a good first line, how we can maybe improve it if it needs improving, or I'll talk about why I like it. So do that. I've got lots of other things, more book reviews coming up on this channel, where I'm going to be talking about why I hate The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the book, and many other things. So if any of that sounds interesting, maybe stick around, subscribe, and I would appreciate to see ya. I'm also on TikTok at Scarlett_Ansley, which is where a lot of this began. I talk about writing, tips, sometimes I do little skits. I don't know, just find me there. Because now it's time for me to be sad and to complain. Thanks for coming. So the Legendborn books are a YA book series by Tracy Deonn. The first one came out in 2020 and the second one came out in 2022, and they have been very well received overall. I mean, obviously you always get mixed reviews, but the first book, Legendborn, has a 4.4 stars on Goodreads. The first book is around 500 pages, and I think the second one's around 580 pages. And I read both in like less than 2 days. I was up until I think 4 in the morning reading Legendborn. I started it at, I don't know, 9 p.m. It was a choice. It was a choice. Which is, you know, I have this problem though where I have a hard time thinking critically about books when I'm like in it, you know? I just want to get into the story and involved, so I read them back to back. And then I was writing out all of my thoughts for this video and I realized I had more like criticisms than I thought that I did. It's still really good. I think I gave both of them 4 stars. And I have just some general critiques that we can talk about here, because I know that people enjoy negative thoughts more than positive ones on the internet, but I'm not making them up just to have negative things to say. I just have some general thoughts. So let us talk about the books. I'm gonna do like a general summary of them, and then we'll talk about spoilery things after. So I'll let you know when the spoilers are gonna happen. But this is, you know, the beginning part just to see if it's something that you would be interested in reading. So let us see. I'm gonna just read you the description, and then I'll go in like the in-depth summary in the spoiler section, but I'll stick to the description so I don't give anything away. After her mother dies in an accident, 16-year-old Bree Matthews wants nothing to do with her family memories or childhood home. A residential program for bright high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill seems like the perfect escape, until Bree witnesses a magical attack her very first night on campus. A flying demon feeding on human energies, a secret society of so-called Legendborn students that hunt creatures down, and a mysterious teenage mage who calls himself a Merlin and who attempts, and fails, to wipe Bree's memory of everything she saw. The mage's failure unlocks Bree's own magic, and a buried memory with a hidden connection. The night her mother died, another Merlin was at the hospital. Now that Bree knows there's more to her mother's death than what's on the police report, she'll do whatever it takes to find out the truth, even if that means infiltrating the Legendborn as one of their initiates. She recruits Nick, a self-exiled Legendborn with his own grudge against the group, and her reluctant partnership pulls them deeper into the society's secrets and closer to each other. But when the Legendborn reveal themselves as descendants of King Arthur's knights and explain a magical war is coming, Bree has to decide how far she'll go for the truth and whether she should use her magic to take down their society or join the fight. I really like that. I just feel like it's a really good description. And so I don't want to give away too much in the non-spoilery section, but I do think that the characterization is done really, really well. There's a lot of interwoven discussion about America and our racial history and slavery and the continued discrimination against Black people in America, and I think that, Tracy does a very good job of that. I am very obviously not the person to talk about the nuances of that. I'm going to have in my description box a couple of Black reviewers who have talked about this book, and not just about, like the microaggressions against Black people that we've seen in the book and the history of slavery, but about the books overall, because I think it's important for us to not only listen when it's convenient and when, we as white people find it uncomfortable to talk about topics, but also just in general, because I know, maybe not me specifically, because I have a very small audience, but someone who looks like me is far more likely to get pushed through in algorithms and to have my voice heard, and so I think it's just important because other people have important things to say as well, not just on the issues of race, but just on books and on everything else. There's my mini TED Talk, so I'm going to have a couple people listed down below, but continuing about the book. So I like that the way that was interwoven. There's like a secondary magic system that kind of interplays with the one that we sort of come to know, and I think that it's done really well. It's really interesting, and we get to see like into different like tiny little snippets of different time periods, and it's just really interesting, and it's a different way of writing magical systems, and I mean not completely different, because I know that root is something that exists in other books and also just in general, but I think the way it's done is really interesting. I don't want to give too much of that away, but I just think it's something that is acknowledged generally. It's not in the description of the book, but I feel like it's not a spoiler, so I like that a lot. The one criticism I will put is that there's a lot of magic terms used early on in the story that I kind of got lost in, and I will say that part of that could just be me. I was kind of tired even when I started the book, and then as I said, I read it till 4 a.m. So some of that might have been me, but there was just like a lot kind of early on. Like you got Legendborn and Onceborn and Shadowborn and Merlin and like all these different names for like the demon things that I don't think I realized at the time were Shadowborn. Like I just got a little bit lost in that, which is fine. I think that she does a good job of examining things like grief and slowly giving us information, but it's just those sorts of names of magical things that I got a little confused in. And this story does take place in our world, as I think you get from the description, so you don't have to deal with like names of magical places or like objects too much. It's mostly just the kinds of creatures or people and different powers, but like it's the leveling of that was confusing, because there's like pages and I think squires, I don't remember. But just like all of that I think was kind of confusing. But I do think it was done very well overall, the book. I think that the story was interesting, and I'm trying to like think of other things that aren't spoilery for this book before I move on to Bloodmarked, and we'll do just a general non-spoilery, and then we'll just go into all the spoilers. This one kind of applies to both books, and it's also a me problem. Like this is mostly just something for me you see a lot in YA books, which is that I have a hard time when characters make silly mistakes, or like not silly mistakes, because I think that that's fair, that like kids will make bad decisions, but things where you're like, why are you, like, that's a bad idea, you're actively thinking it's a bad idea, but then you just do it. Like there's a scene, it's like the very beginning of book 2, so it's not giving much away, where she knows she shouldn't be doing this thing, and then she does it anyway. She like sneaks out when she knows it's dangerous for her to do that, and then it ends up causing lots of problems, because obviously. And she's 16. I know that that's a thing that happens, so this isn't me judging this book specifically. I know it's something in the YA genre. I like My Hero Academia, but all the time I'm watching these characters, I'm like, trust Ayazawa sensei. Just go to a teacher. like as an almost 27-year-old person, I'm like, I know but that's me. Like, that's a me thing, and I know going into reading YA that that's just going to be a factor. So that's not really a specific criticism, but just something that I was thinking about a lot. If you don't want to know anything about book 1, you probably should not listen to the explanation of book 2. So if this is you, if you just wanted to know generally what goes on in book 1, I would stop now. We'll see ya. We'll see you in the next one. I've got lots of things going on. RE, what I said in the beginning of this video. Thank you for stopping by. If you don't care and you're just interested in knowing what happens in the series without reading it, which is fine, I will now tell you what happens in book 2. So Bloodmarked, very similarly, has a 4.41 stars on Goodreads. I think it has fewer reviews though, because we've got 29,000 almost to, 29,000 to 96,000 approximately in terms of rating for stars. So that's significantly less. So it's higher, but we have to take into consideration fewer people reviewed it. And I presume that if you read the second one, you probably liked the first one. So that's always something to consider when you're looking at reviews for series. So let's take a gander at the description for book 2. The shadows have risen and the line is law. All Bree wanted was to uncover the truth behind her mother's death. So she infiltrated the Legendborn Order, a secret society descended from King Arthur's knights, only to discover her own ancestral power. Now, Bree has become someone new. A medium, a blood crafter, a scion. But the ancient war between demons and the Order is rising to a deadly peak, and Nick, the Legendborn boy Bree fell in love with, has been kidnapped. Bree wants to fight, but the regents who rule the Order won't let her. To them, she is an unknown girl with an unheard-of power, and as the living anchor for the spell that preserves the Legendborn cycle, she must be protected. When the regents reveal they will do whatever it takes to hide the war, Bree and her friends must go on the run to rescue Nick themselves, but enemies are everywhere. Bree's powers are unpredictable and dangerous, and she can't escape the growing attraction to Selwyn, the mage sworn to protect Nick until death. If Bree has any hope of saving herself and the people she loves, she must learn to control her power from the ancestors who wielded them first, without losing herself in the process. So, vague thoughts about this book. There was definitely a different tone than what happened in book 1, and it almost felt slower somehow. Even though they were always kind of on the move, it still felt slowish to me. I liked book 1 better. I'll say that. I still liked book 2, but I liked book 1 better. A lot of the positives that were in book 1 I still thought were true in book 2. I did think it was interesting because we see more adults in this book than we did in the first one, but I feel like they're still kind of pointless. Like, a couple of them matter, but it almost still seems like teens on an adventure to save the world when there are adults who should be helping. Like, it's not like they don't exist. They're just like, we're gonna drop you off and you can solve this problem. So I thought that was kind of weird. Oh, and then, yeah, I kind of wish in this book that she had gotten a better hold of her powers earlier on. So this, I don't think it's a spoiler, but she, you know, in the first book has discovered there's more to her power than she thought, which I understand now. You're juggling a whole bunch of new information and you're trying to learn and no one's giving you the space to learn. I understand why she doesn't with the way the story goes, but part of me still wishes that she would have gotten a handle on it better, because I know that's sort of a book 3 problem, I guess. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything, but I feel like Bree doesn't really understand any of her powers much at all, and so she's reliant on, like, a lot of coincidences or like things that happen she can't fully understand, which is fine. Like, to some degree, those sorts of things will happen. But I just feel like we could have gotten a little bit more a little earlier on. And I would like to say this too, because this is true of all book reviews. I find it much easier to give criticism on specific things than to give positive notes. Because, you know, I can give positive notes to individual lines or to chapters, but sometimes you're just like, man, that book was vibes. You know, like sometimes it was just a good book and I liked a lot of the things. So I'm going to be saying like pros and cons and like general criticism, and it's gonna sound like I'm more critical of these books than having, you know, a positive opinion, but it's more because it's easier to give notes than it is to give praise, just because it feels more general. Like when I'm giving praise, it's like, oh, I really liked, you know, the characterization, or I really liked the dialogue. It just sounds more vague, and I can give examples, but like, I just think that that's something worth saying, because I don't want it to sound like I'm just sitting here being like, I give it 4 stars, but here are all the reasons I didn't like it. I just think that that's something that I would like to address beforehand. I really did like these books, but, you know, there's always going to probably be notes, right? So let me go, we're going to talk more in depth about the summary of book 1. But this, right now, whatever time we are at, this is spoilers territory. If you want nothing else, thank you for coming. We've got plenty of other content going on. You'll see me in this outfit at least 5 more times. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you soon. Are they gone? We'll give you a couple seconds. Yes? Okay, for everyone who's still here, let's go into spoilers and talk about the books. All right. This is my summary that I have written down. So, Bree, as we know, is 16. Beginning. Her mom, dead. Okay? So we find her in the police station where they're telling her what happened to her and her dad. There was a car accident, and Bree, it's very beautiful the way that grief is talked about in this aspect. I'm going to go give you some lines later on, but I did like that a lot. This results in Bree going into what she has as 2 separate mindsets. So she is before Bree and after Bree. So it definitely affects her mindset, and she feels like a very different person. And then 3 months after this, she goes to the UNC Chapel Hill campus with her friend, and they're in the, you know, early education program, whatever it's called. And she's still in this heavily grieving mindset. She's still after Bree. And they go to a party at this like woodsy area that has a diving cliff that people jump off of, like, you know, cliff diving. And her friend is like, you don't want to do that. And she's part of her is like, I kind of do, you know, like I want to feel something. And so she tells her friend to go off and see everybody else. And she's standing there like, do I jump? And then somebody grabs her and they're like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And it's Selwyn. And at this point in the book, I was like, okay, this is going to be the love interest, right? He's interesting. He's a very like, they touch, you know, he grabs her and he's like, did you feel something? Or did you like whatever? And she's like, what are you talking about? But then he's gone. And she sees this crazy thing in the woods above the fire. It's like a demon thing. And she's like, oh man, I'm really going crazy now, actually. I'm like losing my mind. But she sees Sel and then this other girl, and they're fighting the thing, and no one else can see that it's there. So she's hiding behind a tree, like, what's going on? She keeps having the thought that's like, leave, and it's not her thought. And she realizes that it's Sel who had tried to, like, it's called mesmering in this book, convince her, like, use his powers and make her leave, right? But she doesn't know about powers. It's not a thing that everybody knows. And so she ends up leaving after seeing them kill this thing. And the cops are there, and she and her friend end up getting put in the back of the police car. Lots of microaggression, very racist-y things go on. And then the police officer sees Sel, and then she realizes Sel has more authority in whatever situation they're in than the police officer. And she's like, oh, this is not good. And so the next day they end up getting called into like the dean's office, and more racist microaggression stuff happens where he's like, hey, your friend, she's got really good stuff going on. You have the potential for good stuff going on. So you're going to need a partner here, like a on-campus partner, like basically accountability partner, to make sure you're staying on track. And she's not happy about this, but it ends up being this guy, Nick. She avoids him for a while. He tracks her down. And as they're meeting for the first time, oh no, she sees another weird thing happening on campus. So she runs toward it. I think it was like a hellhound. I forget what kind of thing it was. I think it was a hellhound. But it attacks her, and then Nick kills it. She goes unconscious. We wake up She's in this kind of like infirmary thing. She can kind of hear bits and pieces of what's going on. She's like all a mess, right? And she finds out a little bit more information about what's going on. She hears words like Legendborn and Onceborn, and I forget if like Merlin comes up then, but so like Shadowborn, all these things start coming up, which is what I was saying. I got confused really early on, like, what is this? And I know she was confused too, but I felt more confused than she did, I think. So, William is the guy who's the medic. He's got the ability to heal her faster. And she talks to Nick. She's like, hey, what the heck, man, is going on? And he finds out that she did not, like the mesmer that Cell did on her didn't work. And he's like, oh no, don't let him know that it didn't work. And he's going to try and do it again. And you should let it happen. And he doesn't really believe at first that she was not mesmered because, like, it's impossible for that to happen. But, of course, she's special. So it didn't work. Cell comes back. He's like, how strange that, you know, I'm seeing you again. He's a little suspicious of her. He tries to mesmer her again. She wakes up in her room. Her roommate friend very angry because she's like, you got drunk and we're not, like, you're just going to keep getting in trouble. But she still remembers what Cell was supposed to have made her forget. So that was a whole, like, ooh, what's going on thing. She ends up doing her research. She's very smart. She finds out there's an on-campus organization, and this organization ends up being the one that they're all a part of. And it's basically like an educational situation, except it's not. It's like just hidden in plain sight, straight up, this organization. And she shows up and then they're like, oh, who are you? And she's like, Nick sent me. And everyone's like, Nick sent you? Well. So it turns out Nick is like this bigwig in the organization, and he shows up and he's like, dude, what the heck are you doing here? And she sort of coerces him into like backing her up on this. She's like, hey, the mesmer didn't work again. I still remember. And something weird happened because my mom, when she was in this accident, I remember the same thing happening. Someone tried to mesmer me. I don't know who it was or what I'm not remembering, but I remember seeing like the same light, basically. And he ends up, because he's a good guy, helping her out, and he's like, fine, we'll go along with this. There's like a whole initiation aspect because she's like going in to be a page, basically, and she is presumed, she's like Onceborn, so not involved in the whole society, because there's like vassals who are not Legendborns or any of that, but they're like mortals almost, I guess, who are aware and associated with the community. And then Merlins, which is what Selwyn is. And we later down the line, we find out that Merlins they're all descendants of Merlin, like the Merlin. But they're also like part demon, like part Shadowborn. That's a big thing that comes up later, but I'll just tell you now because we're spoiling it anyway. The Shadowborn things, that's what the demons are. And then, so pages, I think they're like the ones who are in the initiation process, who are like working to become something higher. I don't know if it's a squire, I can't remember the word now, but it's like the person who is like bonded, oathed to the Legendborn, and the Legendborn are all descendants of the Knights of the Round Table. So they're all in some way related to the original people in Arthurian times. And as they're going through the initiation day, she finds out that Nick, who has distanced himself for years from this community, for whatever reason, is actually the descendant of King Arthur. And she's like, excuse me? And she's also finding out that everyone's shocked he's there because he tried to keep himself away, and she feels really guilty, but she doesn't know what the deal was. And as it turns out, I'm just going to tell you that too, Nick's mom didn't like the way he was treated when he was a kid, when they were all like training him and fighting and everything. She's like, I don't like the way that he's, being raised, and tried to take him away. And then the dad ended up calling like the regents, who were sort of the supervisors, and they had her mesmered. So she doesn't remember her son anymore, or her whole life, basically. And he's like, so that's why when I found out that you could break a mesmer, I'm like, what was I missing? Because I spent all these years trying to figure out how to break it to get my mom back. And I couldn't. And so that was like a whole thing, and he distanced himself from the community. But he ends up back involved because of her, because she's trying to figure out what happened to her mom. And then scions, so all of the Legendborn, like Nick kind of people, they're scions, and that means like when a certain, there's like an old war between them and the Shadowborn. And when enough scions are called, so the scions are like the special descendant basically, and you can only be a scion from age, or a Legendborn from 16 to 22. There's a short period of time where this can happen. So like Nick's dad could not be the scion of Arthur because he's too old. But the scion is the one who, should this war start again, they will be called on by the ancestor who was of the Knights of the Round Table, and get their kind of like strength and memories to some degree. I'm still a little confused on what's supposed to happen, because obviously things don't go as planned. But they get their like sort of demeanor, or like different aspects of their ancestor, right? And if a certain number of them get called, then Arthur is destined to be called. And if you are called as a scion, you have a very short lifespan, so it shortens your life because it's just sort of the way it all goes. So Arthur, his scion is Nick. And then there's all these other ones who we meet. There's lots of names. I'm not going to get into it. And then Selwyn is oathed. So it's like a verbal bond, but it's like a magical one. So you can't break it, otherwise bad things happen. To Nick, to like be his king's mage, which is sort of like the protector of him. So they've known each other since they were very little. We find out down the line that Sel used to like be in love with Nick, but he's not anymore. But the problem is that sometimes their feelings, if they're very strong, can bleed over. And Sel, the thing about Merlins is because they're Shadowborn in some way, like they're part Shadowborn, they need all these oaths to be able to not succumb to the full demonness, right? So that's a whole thing. He's got a lot of anger inside, and so when he gets really angry, sometimes Nick can feel it. That's an important thing to note. So then there's some of these trials, which were not my favorite things, but it was short, so it wasn't like a huge thing. But trials for Paige Brie Matthews to become someone who is capable of being, I'm just going to call it a squire. I don't remember if that was the word. But becoming like the squire for Nick. Most of the trials, I'm like, I'm not a huge trials person in books. Like, it's just sort of a thing. I know why it had to happen, but I'm like, eh. But like I said, it wasn't too long, so that was fine. But then they get to this one trial where they have to have a scavenger hunt for these like magical items on campus. And Sel, who has been very suspicious of Bree because she just keeps ending up in places she shouldn't, at the end of the like Paige initiation thing, like a demon attacks it and is holding her, and he finds that suspicious. He thinks she's possibly a demon, so he's going hard on her, right? He decides he's going to be the one who's like supervising her for this part of the trials. So he's walking with her around campus. They're talking a little bit, but he's still very like mean to her. They're at this one place, and he just starts like, part of the trial is if the hellhounds that he creates, because since he's Shadowborn, he can make hellhounds. If they catch you, then you're out. So the hellhounds come for her, and she's like, okay, I'm out. Like, you can stop now. And he's like, no, you're going to show me that you're Shadowborn. You're going to show me your true power. And basically, he like almost kills her just to try to prove that she's Shadowborn. And she's like, bro, I'm really not. And her like hand lights up in fire, and it's crazy. And then all of a sudden, these hell foxes show up. And those are not cells. It's some other, like, they're actual, straight up attacking Shadowborn. So she and Sel end up working together, and they defeat them. And she's kind of panicking because her firearm goes through the fox's stomach, and she can't get it out. And she's like freaking out. And Sel can't fully destroy it until she's like not doing that anymore. And then he's like starts to be nice to her because he's like, oh man, she's actually not gonna kill Nick and is not a demon. And so I'll talk more about this later. It doesn't show him nearly killing her really. It like he lets it go on pretty far, but like in book 2 they talk about it, and he's like, no, I was gonna kill you though. Like, the hell foxes saved your life because I was definitely gonna kill you. And that's a problem. But we'll talk about it later. That was just something. It was something. Oh, and then in the midst of all of this, Bree's dad makes her see this therapist, right? And she goes to this therapist who actually knew her mom, because her mom went to UNC, and so did this therapist. And she finds out through the therapist that there's this thing called Root, which is a magic system that seems to be only like the black women in, I don't know how that's decided, if it's just like a bloodline thing, it's one of those. And so the therapist ends up teaching her about it because her mom never did. She had no idea this existed. She's like, why would my mom hide this from me? So her therapist brings her to a cemetery, which ends up being the same place later on that Cell has this whole hellhound attack. And she lets her not dream walk, but like ancestor walk, if that makes sense, but with the therapist's ancestors, because that's like part of her ability with Root. And so she ends up like traveling with each ancestor a little bit further back in time, to a place where she sees one of the ancestors holding a baby who has eyes like Cell's, and saying that they have to get rid of it because it's a crossroads baby. So it's like, this is when she finds out that demon, the Shadowborn Merlin thing, and it's earlier on, but we already established this, so it's fine. So that's going on throughout all of this, right? And then Nick and Bree have gotten close. They end up getting together at like 40% into the book, so something's gonna happen. And so when Nick and everyone else from the trials ends up finding Bree and Cell after the Hellfox thing, Nick punches Cell in the face, and Cell can't hit him back because it's part of the oath. He can't hurt him intentionally, but it's because Nick is feeling the bleed through of Cell's anger and killer intent. So he doesn't want to have to hurt her because he's feeling Cell's anger. It's like a whole complicated mess of emotions. And then Nick and his dad is in charge of the UNC branch of the Legendborn. He was the former scion of Arthur. He and Nick are going off to talk to the regents because there's been more Shadowborn attacks happening. So Cell, despite Nick not wanting him anywhere near Bree, ends up helping her train for the last event, which is fighting with swords and stuff. And she's had far less training than anybody else, and he helps her. And she ends up not losing all the time, which, it's a good thing. So she and Cell have been sort of bonding a little bit. And then other stuff happens. I feel like this is very long-winded, so I'm going to try to keep it shorter. She and Cell end up, because of some discoveries made, breaking into Nick's dad's house, finding some documents about the mom situation, because she sort of has this theory where, what if my mom saw something that she wasn't supposed to see, and then she was mesmerized, so they were keeping an eye on her, and there's a whole conspiracy. And so they break in, they get the thing. And also Cell's mom was the previous King's Mage, and she was a really good Merlin, but they said that she was killed by a Shadowborn because she got too cocky. And then the paperwork that they end up finding when they go and break into the house is that she actually wasn't killed. She started losing herself to the demon inside, and so Cell's even more afraid that that's going to happen to him. And they were like, oh yes, she was fine. And then, she started losing it again, so we took her, and we think that maybe she's the one who opened up the gates. So there's this whole theory where she saw this in the Dreamwalk thing, that 25 years ago someone on campus opened up a gate thing from the Shadowborn world, and that's why it's been reopened, that they've been coming through onto campus. And so this paperwork says that it was Cell's mom who opened the gates. And then they find out in the same paperwork that Bree's mom did see something on campus, and they had been keeping constant check on her, but they don't think she knew what happened at all. So her accident was actually just an accident. And so she's upset, she leaves. And also in all of this, like, she and Cell have been bonding. You know, she sees him more as a person now and like an 18-year-old as opposed to like a demon, like someone who's trying to kill her. So Nick comes back then at that moment as she's like trying to leave when she's learned this information where it's not what she thought it was. And she's like, I gotta go. And she has no intention of coming back. She's like, man, I've just been a part of this world that I shouldn't have been a part of. This wasn't meant for me. My mom, she figured her mom did know about what happened, but she's been hiding it all these years. And she's like, I'm doing everything my mom worked so hard to like keep me from. So she ends up going back, and there's more interactions with, there's a therapist, and then the therapist has this other kind of like student who knows Root, and her thing is she's a medium, so she can interact more with the dead. And after some other stuff goes on, she ends up talking back to those people, and she's like, I'm ready to figure it out. Because her dad comes to campus and gives her a box from her mom, and she touches it, and she has all these memories unlocked, and she finds out that she was mesmerized as a child, and that touching this object helped her get the memories back, and it was her mom telling her about this whole situation. So in her family, it's not just this power that she has. It's not, most people can't generate power themselves. It's like they have to, if they're using Root, call it from the ancestors. And then in the in the Legendborn world, the reason they die young is because they've taken the power from the ancestors. They're not asking for it, it's stolen. And so they die young for that reason. And Bree, her family is, well, I forget when we discovered this exactly, but she ends up finding out through a conversation. She goes back, I'm going to link these two thoughts. She gets help from the medium, and she sees her own ancestors, and she finds out that her ancestor was a slave and had been SA'd by the slave owner and got pregnant. And to keep her baby and to like stay alive, she ran. And as she was running, she was begging her ancestors, all of them, to help keep her safe and to do whatever it took to keep her baby safe. And so in doing that, she ends up making this pact, which creates it's a blood, what's it called? A blood crafter? I think she's like, so her whole family line is now kind of cursed, even though she doesn't see it that way, to be blood crafters, so they can create kind of the power. And it's very strong, but the downside is it's only one daughter at a time, and the mothers all die young. So it goes from daughter to daughter to daughter, and we'll see, I think it's in this book, all of the people from Vera, who's the ancestor that started all of this, and then going down, like we see a little bit of all of those. It might be in Bloodcraft, but so we find out that information. But when she's talking to her, or when she's seeing her memories from her mom, it's her kind of explaining the basics of that information that she had. And so her mom also leaves her with this message where she's like, you gotta live, you gotta like live your life. And after the medium thing, she ends up with like her grandma in her head, which is kind of interesting. And she ends up going, there's this dinner event ball thing with all the Legendborn people, and she's gonna go say goodbye. She's like, I gotta at least go say my goodbyes to this world I shouldn't have been a part of. She goes, and then things get crazy. She dances with Sal, which is like super cute. And then Nick is like, I want her to be my squire person. And everyone's like, and then she thinks about what her mom said, and she accepts the thing. And then we get an explosion of craziness and very racist people, and people who are like, you stole this from my son, and all this other stuff. So Sal steals her away, and then she and Nick in this little room having like a little smoochy smooch. And then other stuff happens. He gets called away. She gets kind of kidnapped by his dad. And we find out that the dad was the one who opened the gate 25 years ago. And he's got this crazy like belief. So he's oathed up the wazoo, but because he believes what he's doing maintains his oath, it hasn't killed him yet. So he thinks that all of these new people who are involved in the Legendborn society are kind of grifters. Like they just want them like the money, and they want like the the dinners and the prestige and all that. And so he thinks we need to like start the war and like get it all back to what it's supposed to be. So 25 years ago, he had done that because he wanted the war to start so that Arthur would call on him to be the scion and they could like get the war going, and it didn't work. So he tried again now, which is why all these like Shadowborn have been coming out so that he can get Nick to be the scion of Arthur so they can start the war. So it's like the guy has been trying to start this war for like a quarter of a century. So it's pretty crazy. And he has his own King's Mage, who's way creepier than Sel could ever be, and he tries to mesmer her Bree. Earlier he tried, and he realized that he couldn't, and that she's like got something going on. So they steal her best friend and start rewinding her memory to try to get Bree to agree not, like, just to leave and not get involved in all this and let it happen. And so she agrees. She somehow manages to help Alice get her memories back. The two of them are like, this is crazy, because Alice remembers. So they go back to the place where all the other Legendborn are. And she's like, we gotta stop this thing that's going on. And then basically the whole end of the book is like this crazy situation where there's like, they're looking for the dad who's taken Nick to where on campus, apparently, Excalibur is. And so they go and they realize it's like under this like passage thing, and so they go and blah blah blah, they're like breaking up, and then one of the guys who's one of the other pages, I guess, that she was friends with, turns out not to have been him for like most of the time. He was actually this demon thing who had taken his face and his life, and just was pretending to be him so that they could get to Arthur when he became Arthur. And so there's like a whole lot of fighting that happens. Sel shows up, it's like a whole, and then we get to this point where they're like, fine, we'll call on Arthur, we'll like see if we can get him to come, and Nick does whatever he's supposed to do, and he like goes to pull Excalibur, and it doesn't work. And then Bree hears her grandma's like, okay, it's time, I'll let Vera come. So her grandma in her brain switches out for Vera, her ancestor. She chats for a little bit, and then she's like, okay, I'll let him in now. And then we find out that Bree is actually Arthur's scion. And it's like, so she goes and she pulls Excalibur out of the sword. She's like kind of possessed by Arthur in a way. And so the guy who the ancestor of Vera, like the slave owner, had been the previous scion of Arthur. So all of this has happened because of this. And the wife of the scion of Arthur, who everyone thought was like the ancestor of Nick, actually had an affair with Lancelot's scion. So Nick is really the scion of Lancelot. So then he becomes the scion of Lancelot. At the same time, all this fighting's happening. We find out that the demons, the Shadowborn, are working with another group of people who are like the ancestors of Morgaine, and this team up is very unsettling. Lots of like the Legendborn, lots of people die. Bree kind of passes out after this epic fight. She wakes up later on in the infirmary to Sel bursting in, and he's like, where is he? And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, Nick is missing. And that's how the book ends. Okay, so I just had some dinner, came back, gave my voice a little bit of a rest because I was talking for a very, very long time. I'll try to make the second summary shorter, but I make no promises. But before that, let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons that I saw in book one. Like I said, a lot of the pros are kind of vague, and I've addressed some of them in the more generic, non-spoilery version, but I think that there's a really nice discussion about grief and about the development of learning how to deal with grief and her before and after Bree and sort of going through these stages. I think that was done pretty nicely. I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know what the official way to do that is, but just from, my general knowledge, I feel like it was well done. I also said I liked the way that she was able to, it didn't feel like drawing you out of the story when she started talking about more of like America's history with slavery and like all of our racial problems that we have, and like racist problems, I guess. It was very well integrated within the story, and so I think that that was a plus. These are just ones I already said, so I'm trying to... I think that Bree had a very strong character voice. I think that the dialogue was really well done. It just was a very well-flowing story. It was long, and I think there were some things... I don't know if I would say some things that would cut necessarily. I'll get to my cons. Let me finish the pros first. I think, like I said, the root magic system was really cool. I thought that was like way cooler to look at all of that stuff, and like how like her going in and seeing the ancestors of different, like her family, and then of the therapist's family, Patricia something. I thought that was really interesting. I kind of wish we could have focused more on that, to be completely honest, because I feel like all the order of the round table people or whatever, not necessarily like the kids, like some of the side characters were cool, but just, I don't know, I found the root stuff way more interesting. And I do like that the mom really did die in an accident. I think that it not being like a big conspiracy was really nice. I mean, not nice that she died, but you know what I mean. It was nice to see that she had to acknowledge that there was more of just sometimes things are what they are. And I mean, obviously we figure out later on that mom, like the mothers in this family line, just die earlier because of the Bloodcraft situation, but the accident itself was just an accident. But I think it was within this book that we find out that the one who had mesmered Bree at the station when she found out her mom died, and as a child, was actually Sel's mom. And it wasn't some big like hiding what actually happened, but it was really Sel's mom saying, I know you're not going to remember this, to Bree, but she was my friend. And so Sel's mom and her mom somehow knew each other, which I thought was really sweet and interesting, because it kind of showed that Sel's mom isn't like lost to the Shadowborn blood or whatever, that there is a way that she's not like that. This might have been book 2. Honestly, whatever. You're gonna find out what happens in book 2 in a minute anyway. So that's something that happens. I just like the story in general. I'm looking to see, but I feel like that's what I was saying. It's harder to like be specific about things I like a lot. I can give you some lines that I like though. I'll put them up. So one was on page 2. They are past tensing my heart, my whole beating, bleeding, torn heart, right in front of me. It's a violation. Kindle, you can see what lines people highlight a lot. This was one of them. Page 13 was talking about her after Bree situation. She is the unwanted souvenir that death gave me. And then this one, I just picked a couple. There were a bunch, but these were just like a handful of ones that I thought were nice. This one was like maybe not even fully the lines, but just like the general scene. And this is when she's at that like dance gala thing, and she's dancing with Sel, because he had pulled her away from a conversation with Isaac, the like creepy mesmer king's mage guy who's Nick's dad's whatever. So they're dancing, right? And then Nick comes out and he like sees them dancing, and it's Nick's eyes are glued to us, to Sel's body draped around mine, and the anger on his face burns bright as a firework, even halfway across the room. I pull away, but Sel's fingers hold fast at my hip, keeping me close. He murmurs low, just for my ears. Oh, the scene he'd make if he could. I just like them, and this is my toxic trait, is that I just always, I like the problematic ones. Not too problematic, like not super problematic. I'm not an Alina Darkling person. If you are, that's fine. I like the Darkling if he was like, I like the fandom version of the Darkling where he like realizes he's being a terrible person, which I feel like is a different thing than just shipping Alina with the Darkling as is. But anyway, like I said, I really thought this was gonna be the ship, and then Nick shows up and he's just like really cute and really funny and accepting, and he's like earnest, and he's like a good dude, you know, he's just a good dude, and I'm just here like, but Sel. And I know that's problematic. I don't like that in real life. Like, I'd much more likely be like a for Nick person in real life, but in books I'm just like, but Cell, y'all need to work some things out, you know? And you gotta, he's just got that energy. And that's my own problem. But so every time they have scenes together, I'm like, I know he tried to kill you, but I feel like... So, that's my problem. And then I think it's at the end of this book, I'm trying to remember, but meh, where he and her are having a conversation after they realize Nick is gone, and he basically says, like, you're like my king, and then he says a word in Welsh that she doesn't know, and that becomes like a whole thing in the next book. It's either at the end of this book or the beginning of the next one. So let's talk a bit about the cons. And like I said many a time, these aren't all bad things, they're just things I noticed. So like I said before, confused a little bit in the beginning about all the terminology. And I'm like almost still confused about what it means to be a scion. I know it means you're the one that gets like called as a person of the Round Table, but I don't know what that entails normally. Like, I know a couple of them did, but no one that we really see close enough, so I know she wrote it. I think I maybe just missed it or misunderstood it, so that could just be a me problem. Like, I totally thought they were gonna be like full-on possessed, which... And one of the creators I have in my, linked down in the description, Jess Owens, talks about this, and it's how Bree is the only main character who is black. Like, her dad shows up every once in a while, mostly in like phone calls or references. Her therapist is black, and then the other girl whose name starts with an M, Mariah, I think, is also black. But they're all kind of side characters, and I recognize that the reason that she wrote it like that was probably so we could get like a more, not even emphasized in that it's like not realistic, but just like see more directly all of the like racism and microaggressions and stuff directed at her only. And I don't think it's that abnormal to be like the only black person in like a space full of white people. Like, I know that that's a thing that happens, so I don't think that it's like impossible or unlikely. But I guess it would just be more leaning towards being a different book if we had it any other way, where we were focusing more on like the root and more on that side of everything, which is, like I said, I like that more just because it was just, I don't know, there was like more substance, it felt like, and I guess I was more confused about lots of the stuff with the order, and there were so many characters and people and like words, and it just, I don't know, I feel like the root side of things, it was like not simple, but I understood all of it, and I feel like it had all of these like rich ties to family and like all this stuff. And I know the juxtaposition is intentional, at least I think it is, where you're getting like the strong family ties and we have to get power from our ancestors on this side, and then like they've stolen their power even though they don't know it now, and their ancestors, they think they have these ties too, but it's not quite the way that they imagine it. So there's a juxtaposition there, and I think that's very intentional. But like it's a solid point where she is like the only main character who is black. And there's like certain ramifications of that, and you see that in the story. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing because I feel like that's intentional, but it's just something to note. I think I said this earlier too, I wasn't like in love with the trials section of the book, but it was short, and I understand why it was there. It just was like, meh. I don't know, I kind of skimmed it a little bit. Like, I read it, but I was like, not my favorite kind of thing. Oh, and then the timeline, I was a little funky because all of this stuff happened in like 2 weeks, and I feel like the bonds that she like supposedly made with some of these characters, like the side characters, and even like Nick and Cell to some degree, like it seemed as though a lot of this happened very quickly. In my mind, until I realized it was that short of a period of time, I thought it was maybe months. But then I was like, well, I guess they haven't been in classes, because this was all before the semester really started. And, well, I guess they were. No, they were. There was like a reference to a class. But it was like a really short period of time, I think, and that was a little bit odd to me when I realized that it was so rushed. I'm not sure why it was. Like, I know the point was, oh no, all the Shadowborn are coming and everything has to be condensed. It's sort of that Dan Brown style like thriller. You have to like shorten your clock, I guess. But I feel like when you're developing relationships, that's the downside. And this one's not like a full con, but the prose is very simple. I know it's YA. There's like there are very pretty lines that are in here, but it's simple. Not a bad thing, just a statement. And then our last con is that Bree is both a little bit too OP and also not. She's Midoriya in some ways. like she'll have these moments of big power, but there's no way to control it, you know? And she doesn't really know what's happening. And then by the end of the book, you find out that not only is she the scion of Arthur, and she's got this crazy bloodcraft, like, strength and her power, she's also her own, like, on her own. She's a medium, but she didn't unlock that ability until she, like, learned to get rid of after Bree, where there wasn't a before or an after, it was just Bree. And so she had kind of been locking herself off to that because her powers came in after her mom died, because it's like one child, you know, at a time. And since she put up this like mental wall, she couldn't access that power. But it just seems like there's so much, and it becomes relevant all in the next book. But it's like, she's both really OP and that she has 3 things going for her, but then also we'll find out she just has no ability to control these powers. So these are just a couple of things. I was like, but honestly, they don't overshadow how good the book was. And I want to emphasize that too, because I know when you just like talk about cons and then you move on, then it leaves a negative connotation, I think. But I really liked this book. There were also a few things that I was just like, I don't know how to feel about referencing real life things in books. So like page 15, she said, "I knew hoped you." Because it's like, did you Star Wars me? I knew hoped you. And that happens a couple times, and I recognize we're in the real world, but for some reason, whenever we reference real things, I always get, like, taken out of what I'm reading. It's not the worst thing in the world, and it's not, like, a big red, you know, stop sign or anything, but I don't know, some other people have issues with that, and I am one of them. It's not extreme, but it was something I just thought about. And then the last thing, this one was just a line I didn't know how to feel about. Part of me liked it and part of me didn't, so I wanted to know what you thought of it. It's on page 107, and it's like a table that she sees. I'm not gonna get into it. But it's, "The slab feels old, worn and heavy, like a coin dropped by a giant long ago." Reading it now, I think I like it. I just don't know. I did this with my own writing the other day. I was like, do I like this line or is it really bad? I really can't tell. Sometimes I'm just not sure. So let me know what you think, because I am indecisive. Let us move on now to the summary of Bloodmarked. And I'm going to try to keep it shorter. Like I said, the first one that was really long. Okay. We start off with Bree and the gang not allowed to look for Nick. So one of the people who's another one of the scions who does not like Bree, at the end of the last book, she called the regents, I think, who are like the overseers, and they're like, yeah, no, you can't look for him, we'll look for him, you just keep on keeping on. And she's kind of going stir crazy because they moved her into the like lodge, the Order's Lodge thing, and everyone else is going around and doing patrols and making sure that at least their territory is safe. And they're like, you just stay in your room, go to classes, and we'll have some people walk with you and stay with you, and then you come back, stay in your room. And so this is what I was talking about before, but then she obviously sneaks out, and she has been sneaking out, and William sees her and goes with her, because she's like, I just want to train, I have all these powers, and I like can't use them, because no one will let me train them. And so of course they do that, and Cell shows up and he was doing his patrols and he's like, why are you doing this? I keep telling you, you're not only putting yourself in danger, but because you are so important, you are putting other people in danger. And so I'm Team Cell. It's what I was saying. She's making decisions she knows are bad, and I understand why she's making them. Just, I don't like it. Like, it's just illogical. And he's like, you could have trained inside in the training room. Like, I don't know what you're doing. And then, of course, all of these Shadowborn just start attacking. And Cell kills them, all of them, and then, bam! All of a sudden, all of these Merlins show up, and they're the Mage Guard. And then we find out that Sel didn't get one. He like thought he killed all of them, but he missed one. And then we later find out that he missed it because he thought that he needed to save Bree because he like noticed that she was in danger. But he gets in trouble for it, and they're like, you've been negligent of your duties for a long time, and like you're in some trouble, man. So this is what I mean. She just like makes choices, and then they impact her friends. Which is, as a writer, that's a good thing. You want to do that. As a reader, I'm like, what are you doing? It's funny. It's like the difference between driving and being a pedestrian. You have different priorities, you know? So then we have the funeral for all the people who died at the end of the last book. Like, they're all kids, like 17, 18, whatever. And lots of people show up. They find out that people are asking where Sel is because he's responsible for keeping people safe. Like, that's what the King's Guard is for. It's not just to keep the Arthur's Scion safe, it's to keep everyone who's in that branch of the order safe. And so they're blaming him for everything that went wrong because the regents and everyone are keeping secret all of the stuff about the war and the things that Nick's dad did. They're like, we're just gonna keep it on the DL. So they end up blaming Sel publicly and saying that it's all his fault and that he's run away. And Bree, like, in the middle of this funeral thing, stands up and is like, excuse me, no, what? It's not his fault, which is just not a great decision. I understand why that was made too, but public spectacle, not great. No one knows that she is the Scion of Arthur at this point either. Like, the Mage Guard do and the regents do, but like the normal people, that's also being kept on the DL, so they think that Nick is still the Scion of Arthur, but he's not there, right? And so they're like, we're keeping him safe, which is obviously a lie. So the funeral ends, and then they are going to take her to this, like, cave thing, I think, for the rite, so that she can kind of make her oaths, so she can, like, accept Arthur and, you know, oath to, I think, the order in general. And on her way there, the car gets attacked. She's saved by Sel, who did run away but was following her to keep her safe. He gets captured by the Mage Guard and arrested, basically. And she's very upset about this, keeps trying to get them to give him back, but they're like, no. And so she is in the car now to go the rest of the way to the cave with, what is the name again? Erebus, who is the head of the Mage Guard. So they're going, they talk a little bit, they show up at the thing, and then more things happen. They start the whole process of the rite. She has to pull Excalibur from the stone because at the end of the last book she like put it back in after the battle was over. So they need her to take it back out and then say like the oath words. And no one knows what happens to the Scion of Arthur when the oath is taken. Like, it's an internal thing that no one else can see. So they start the process, she starts the oath, she's in the, like, this mind world where she's seeing the table of the original knights, you know? And she sees Lancelot, and something draws her to Lancelot just in general. She can't tell if the body she's in is hers or Arthur's or what is happening, but she touches Lancelot's hand, and then all of a sudden he becomes Nick. Because remember, Nick is Lancelot's Scion, and Nick is like, excuse me? And she's like, oh my gosh. And he's like, don't come for me. So they're like, will you swear yourself to the order, blah, 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 blah. And after everything, she sees Nick and all of her thoughts, and she's like, no. So she ends up in this like dreamscape with like a river with Vera, her ancestor. Yeah, it's the ancestral stream, I think that's what it was called. I had to double check. She's there very briefly, and then she sort of comes to in the real world just as someone's jabbing a syringe into her neck. And then she wakes up in this other place, and they kind of keep doing the same thing over and over again, like, good morning, Bree. Good afternoon, Bree. And she doesn't remember any of it, so they've been mesmering her and then drugging her so she can't access her ancestral power. They didn't know until she fought back at the Shadowborn attacking the car on the way to the right, that she had like the root ability, because that's not something people know about really. And then it happened again when they were like about to jab her. She was like exploding with power almost, and they were recording it, and they end up using it against her when they're like, we're going to show your friends that you're a very dangerous person and have no control over her power. When that's not the truth. They like framed the whole thing like that, and she's like, oh, you guys never planned to let me finish the rite. You were always going to do this because you don't want an Arthur who looks like me, an Arthur who is like me. And then she's also like, and no one wants to acknowledge how, you know, I came to exist in the first place. And they're all very uncomfortable about that. And it's just one of those things where then they're like, well, we're going to mesmer you again. Let's forget you had this whole conversation. We'll just keep you here. So the guy who's the Merlin doing all this mesmering, he's real creepy. But he kind of realizes that it's not fully sticking, because the way that Bree stops mesmering from working is pain. So she had seen William, because William was taken with her to like help heal her when the time came. And he, like, they met up right before this meeting where she's finding out all this information, and he, like, is able to make it so that she's in pain, so she'll remember the stuff. And he, the creepy Merlin guy, he's like, ooh, I feel like something's a little funky here. I'm gonna bring you back to your room, but if you ever go running, I will enjoy chasing after you. And basically he's just very unsettling. So she's there, and then gets a weird call because something happens. I think they like leave something in her food. She's like, oh, there's a call. An earpiece or something. I think it's an earpiece. And someone on the other line is like, you're going to have a window of opportunity to escape. It's going to happen very soon. Do it now. And she's like, I got nothing better to do. So she escapes. She realizes it's Alice, her best friend, who was supposedly mesmered not to remember anything about the world at the end of the other book, but somehow whatever Alice did when she fixed her memories in the first place just stuck. So she still remembers, and then William, right before he was taken to go like help Bree and be taken to the compound thing too, handed her a paper with a phone number which had like some of these other order members who are now too old to be like Legendborn people. And so she calls them. They're the ones who organize this whole thing, help her break out. They also have other people who got sell out. So then all of them end up on this plane. And they get dropped off at this safe house thing. And in the meantime, Bree talks to this one order member who is also black. And she's like, how do you survive in this world? And she's like, we gotta like stick together. And then she also apparently has family who knows the route. So she hands her this piece of paper. It's like, if you ever need help, this is a thing. And she's like, okay. So they're at the safe house. And then the guy who owns the house is also one of these like former people in the order. And he waits till everyone else is distracted. And then he lures Bree outside. And then lets a demon try to kill her. She's like, huh? Because we kind of learned this before, that if a Shadowborn kills Scion of Arthur, there's no way for Arthur's like existence to be reborn again, even in a different family member. So like if a non-Shadowborn killed her, then they would just find another ancestor somewhere, but they keep having trouble doing that because of American history and how awful people are. Because there's like very few records of family lines after like when you get back far enough to where people own slaves, which is just true and awful. But it's causing the current order and like the regents and stuff a lot of problems. So there's that, I guess. But he wants her dead because he wants this whole thing to stop because he lost someone. It's whatever. But she ends up being able to use her root craft, which he thought was not going to happen because she's been drugged, you know, and she couldn't use her power, but she had stopped taking the pills that she stopped eating because I guess they were putting it in her food. So she was able to like, and the demon was like trying to eat her power, and then she did, and then she's like, oh no, I can't do that. You're much more useful to us alive, because it like burned when the demon ate her power. And she says something about the, what's it called? The Great Devourer. Just a thing that's mentioned. And then the guy who wanted her dead tries to like throw a knife at her. Misses, because I think it hits Cell. I think Cell stops it, something. And then the guy dies, because he was oathed to not hurt the King of Arthur, or the scion of Arthur, I guess. And so as soon as he broke that oath, it killed him. And then there's also a conversation like later down the line, not much later, but I think pretty soon, where she and Cell have a conversation. This is when they talk about how, when he's like, no, I was gonna kill you back then. Like, I really was. And I don't know what would have happened, because even though Merlins are only part Shadowborn, who's to say? Like, I could have done a lot of damage. Plus, I just, like, can't imagine wanting to kill you now, and that's, like, really upsetting to me. And she keeps being like, but you didn't know. Like, you thought you were protecting, you know, Nick, who was the Scion of Arthur at that point. And he's like, no, you were always the Scion of Arthur. Like, you gotta understand, you were always this, and I was wrong. And so this is why I'm like, can we forgive him a little? Can we forgive him a little bit? I don't know. I have this TikTok about it where it's like, when you have enemies to lovers stories, they can't do anything that's so awful that they can't be forgiven later down the line. And so I think this is one of those instances where you have to decide for yourself if this is something that he can be forgiven for. I think he's very repentant. I think he punishes himself a lot throughout this story and proves that he's not as bad as he thinks he is, but that's me, and if you disagree, that's fine. This is my toxic trait. It's fine. But they have a very, like, tense moment where she's helping him bandage up his arm from an injury he got during this whole shebang. And she's like, your fangs look longer. I mean, bigger. I mean, and he like, you know, in between like the sink, and he's like flirting with her. And I'm like, that's so cute. And the problem is that we don't see Nick most of this book. So I'm like, how am I supposed to keep shipping her with Nick when I don't see him most of the time? And then, yeah, like, every time they do see each other in the dreams or whatever, they, like, kiss and whatever. And it's cute. It is. But I just like Sal, okay? I'm just one of those people. So they have this moment. She ends up leaving before anything can happen. And then she goes to sleep, talks to, I think, Vera in a dream, and then I think that was it. I think she just has another conversation with Vera, and then in the morning, she goes out, and then William, Alice, and Sal are all like, so we've talked. We've decided, yeah, you can't go after Nick, because people are trying to kill you actively, and we don't know. There's just so many enemies. Like, we can't keep you safe if you are also running into danger. And this is another one of those instances where you have to consider that it's not just you. You're important to everyone, and we will have to make decisions, like sacrifice ourselves for you if you choose to make these decisions. And I feel like she still doesn't fully understand that, even after all this. Like, I feel like that's not something that, like, registers to her. And I get that that must be a hard thing where you're used to just being independent, and then all of a sudden, if you die, a lot of other people have ramifications in that way. I mean, you do anyway, but in a different way. But so she's very upset about it, but they end up doing that. They call the people who saved her in the first place, and they're like, yeah, go down to the basement. We'll have a cool spy moment where you get to take all these, like, clothes and, like, some gear or whatever. And so they do that, and then they end up driving to the place that she has on that little card that she got from the other agent. And they get there, and then they find out that it's kind of like sketch, because it's for people who have powers who hate the Order and aren't part of the Order. And then, of course, Bree and Cell end up getting in trouble, and she uses her power to try to, like, protect him, which is, like, a no-no in this establishment. And so the owner, like, takes them both to the office, and then in a conversation, he ends up showing her that Cell is not what he's been showing himself to be. And this whole time in book 2, he's been like slowly becoming more demonic looking. Like his skin is like really like, ew, and then his eyes are much more like, oh. And the reason his teeth are like, oh, is because he's becoming more demonic, because Nick isn't there, so he can't hold on to his oath. And so he's like losing some of his humanity. And he's like been mesmerizing her this whole time. And so every time he does something like flirty and cute, she's like, wait, was all of that just so you could mesmer me, or was any of it real? Like, she's upset, understandably so, and he's just sort of pathetic. And he's like, I'm really sorry, I just didn't want you to see me, whatever. I get it, but I'm like, oh, so sad. But then the guy's like, okay, well, he's already paid his debt, because look how miserable he is. And then he gives him like a vial of something to drink that helps him like not be so demonic at that point. It's not like, it doesn't end all of it, but it slows down the process. So he's like feeling better, but they send him away. And then the guy, his name is Valak, he's like, you still owe me, because you did the most and got in trouble. Lady who does crazy magic in a place that you're not supposed to do it. And also he's convinced that she like only got this power through a deal, because he's a crossroads kind of demon guy. And he's convinced that there's no way she could have this power if it wasn't through a deal. But she's like, it wasn't, and she can't tell him about being the Scion of Arthur, because that's, 1, very dangerous, just in general, because they don't like the Order, but 2, because this guy had just said right before that he would happily kill the Scion of Arthur if it would make Cell more miserable, because that would be fun. So she can't do that. So he ends up bringing her where everyone else is, where William and Alice and now Cell are, and all these other patrons and stuff. And it's like, cool, you're gonna either have to make a deal or like you die, kind of. And Alice, because she's smart and notices things, she's like, wait, what if I give you information that's very important? Will you let us go? And he's like, yeah, if it's that good. And then she like tells him that someone who works for him was taking vials of like the stuff that he needs that's very important or something. And they're like, wow, that's pretty good information. I guess you're good to go. I know it's supposed to show that like Alice can be helpful too, but it's one of my cons. It just feels really convenient. But anyway, the reason that they were sent there in the first place is to look for this lady whose name starts with an L, I think, and I just cannot remember what it is. So he's like, yeah, I'll show you to her office real quick. And then they meet her. And then in the office is also Mariah, who was the medium from the first book. And then Bree is like, pardon? So she's, I guess, the niece of the lady who works there. It's a whole thing. Again, kind of convenient that happens to be, because it's like, I think not close to where they were. They had to take a plane to get to that safe house. And she's like, yeah, no, I just work here on the weekends sometimes. I don't know how far it was, to be honest, but I'm like, that just seems unlikely. But whatever. So she ends up talking about how she has like this bloodcraft, and then they're like, well, that's bad. And she's like, you don't know the truth and the history. And so, I don't know, conversations are had. They're like, we need to get you to a safe house because you have too much power and like stuff. I don't know. So they agree to help her. It's just like a kind of confusing time to me, to be completely honest. So they go and like they get driven to this one place where they're like, we'll stay here for one night and then we'll go to the safer place after this because it's far. And it's like the wife of the lady who they were supposed to see. It's like she's cooking, it's her house. And so they do that and they stay there for the night. And then Bree has a conversation with Cell. Names are hard, and every time I say Cell, when I read it, totally fine, I pictured that guy. When I say Cell, I picture Cell from Dragon Ball Z. Not helpful. But Cell is like kind of broody because she's mad at him and he knows why she's mad and it is his fault, but he's sad. So he just like patrols and they don't interact, and she talks to Valak and he's like, you know, I love seeing him suffer. It's kind of fun. but you gotta understand where he's coming from. So they end up having a conversation, and he apologizes, and he's like, I just didn't want you to see me for, like, less than what I want to be. And I know it was the wrong thing to do, and, like, I hope you can forgive me. And she's like, you know, if it were me, even, like, a couple weeks ago, I would have been, like, all for it. Like, oh, no, I understand. But I'm not that person anymore. And so she just leaves. So Bree has also been having dreams of Nick, once on the plane, and then once when she's at the house, after she has this conversation with Cell. I'm pretty sure it's after, where he ends up telling her where he is, because things are getting pretty bad. There's, like, been a couple Merlins that have shown up, and then Isaac keeps killing them, and he's like, okay, fine, come, because things are going bad. And Cell has been a couple of times, like, feeling the pain, knowing that he's in trouble. So she and Cell go try to find Nick. They find him, and it's just in time to see his dad getting impaled, and then Isaac is like, he ends up dead too. Then Max, who's, like, one of the guys who does something bad, I forget what his whole thing was, but Nick kills him, just straight up. So he's now, it wasn't even in self-defense really, he just killed him. And he sees Bree and Cell, who are, like, behind a bush or whatever, and then he, like, goes the other way. And then Bree and Cell are both kind of like, what? We're here to save you, and you left. You went the other way. And so Cell picks her up and does an Edward Cullen and goes, whew, runs really fast. They try to get out of there. And Erebus finds them, because Erebus was also there at the house where Nick was. And they have this big kind of fight, and Cell's been in these power restricting cuffs this whole time, because, you know, they stole him from prison and they couldn't get them off. And so Alice ends up doing this, like, super amount of power and then breaks them. And they have more fighting, and then Erebus gets, like, launched across the way, but she gets attacked really bad and she almost dies. And so Valak is there, because he, like, comes, he's like, I felt this, like, crazy amount of power. I knew it must be you. And then he sees that she's dying, like, her insides are outside, kind of a thing. And so Cell uses his powers to keep her from dying. Valak goes and gets William, because he can, like, heal people. And then she passes out. We wake up, and then we find out that Cell very nearly, like, succumbed to the demon stuff, because he used up so much of his power, saving her, and it was a real close call. And he has this whole conversation with her that's really sweet, where it's like, you know, she's like, I'm sorry I almost died. I know that would be like a big problem for, you know, the Order. And everyone's like, do you have such a hard time believing we also care about you not dying? She just, I think the problem is before, everyone was like, stop putting yourself in danger, because if you die, we're all going to be in trouble. Lots of different ways. And so now she's like, well, I guess the only reason I'm important is because I'm the scion, you know, and that would be troublesome. But now they're like, we also just care about you, though. And so she has this, like, conversation with him with Cell, where he's like, your power was like I can still taste you. And she's like, you can't just say things like that. So that's fun. They end up going, so like, well, we're not really safe anymore, so we gotta get out of here. So they go to Volition, which is the place where they were supposed to go in the first place, the safe one. And here there's a barrier that's set up by the ancestors. So they're, like, the ones powering it. It's, like, super duper strong barrier. No one can get through it. And she can kind of feel the ancestors. She, like, falls to her knees. And Mariah is with them, who's also a medium. And so she's like, yeah, right? It's crazy. And she has to give permission to the ancestors for her friends to go into the barrier. So she does, and then they have, like, a little bit of training, and she ends up going through this process with them where she talks to her old, like, all of the women ancestors and her family back to Vera, just a little bit at a time, because she's trying to find out information about this great devourer, because I think it was in book 1, and I briefly mentioned it. She sees little snippets of their lives, and in some of that is this person who's, like, hunting them throughout time. And so she was trying to figure out, what the heck is that about? And I guess before they went to Volition, she had this conversation with Valak, and he was like, my power, I can kind of, like, figure some stuff out about other people's powers if you want me to do that. And he does, and he, like, reads her thing, and all of these, like, lines show up on her body, and they find out that she's, like, kind of, like, blood-pacted to a demon. And so she's trying to figure out what's going on, and she's talking to her ancestors. They really don't have much to give her, but there's this really sweet scene where she gets to see her mom again, and oh, that was, like... And she, like, Alice and all of her friends are also there while this is happening, and she and Alice have known each other since they were kids, so the mom is just like, I knew you would help take care of her, Alice, and then, like, to her new friend, she's like, and I'm like, thank you guys for taking care of her. It was really sweet. It was really sweet. And then she goes back, and no one can really give her anything useful, and then she gets into a big fight with Vera, because she's like, you've cursed our bloodline, and Vera's like, I saved us, and it was a whole thing, and her power ends up kind of exploding the barrier, and so they have to, like, fix it. The ancestors do. It's just a thing. So she runs off, she's embarrassed and she's upset, and Cell is, like, really nice and helps her, and it was also her birthday right around this period of time. So they go outside the barrier, and he, like, shows her this pretty place he found when patrolling, and it's got fireflies, and they have this really, like, cute conversation, and they end up smooching, and I'm like, anyway, they get back, they're, like, on their way back, and they sense something, and there's a Merlin there, and he's like, uh-oh. So they run back, get inside the barrier, and then they find out that Erebus has found them, and they can't get in, none of them, because, you know, it's a very strong barrier now. And he ends up being like, hey, this is, like, very good situation, I guess. You're kind of trapped, but, like, I can't get you. However, but I have your therapist, who she's kind of, like, become better friends with and stuff, too, so it's not just, like, a random therapist. Not that any therapist should be in this position, but, you know. So he's like, I'm gonna kill your therapist if you don't come out here. So she can't really see a solution. She ends up making the deal that Arthur has been trying to get her to make, because she can, like, still hear him in her head. And she agrees to let him take over her body. She's like, let's fight together like we did at the end of the first book. And he's like, yeah. He takes over her body. I just stabbed myself in the eye. Ow. He takes over her body and then, like, goes out, and he won't give it back. Like, he's kind of fighting the people who are trying to take him in her body. But he won't give it back to her. She's like, we're supposed to be sharing this situation. And he's, like, just full on, like, has been manipulating her this whole time. And then, like, Alice comes out to try to, like, grab the therapist, and she ends up getting hurt because she tries to grab for Bree, but she doesn't realize that Bree is Arthur, and so she gets hurt, maybe dead, who knows. And then we end up getting a chapter from Arthur's perspective, which is interesting. So he's just getting used to, like, being Bree. I mean, he's not pretending to be her, but just being in the form of Bree. And there's a weird conversation he has. He's like, oh, old friend, but it's not the old friend. It's, like, the leader of the Shadowborn, like, the Great Devourer or whatever. So he has this conversation, and then he's like, I thought I killed you. And then it's like, nah. But then, I don't really know, something weird happens, and then all of a sudden he's, like, there, and Erebus is there, and he's like, we gotta go, we'll take you to the rest of the council, the round table, we've gathered everybody. So he goes after some debate. A bunch of stuff happens. I'm not gonna get into it because it's not super important to the end of the book. It's more like the rest of the table are there, some of her friends that she had from the other beginning of the other book, you know? And allegiances and whatever happened, whatever. So we end up back with Bree, and she is in the world that Arthur's been in this whole time. So it's like memories, kind of. And, okay, I forgot. This was something that happened a really long time ago, and I kind of forgot. After Nick ran away, she went into the dream world thing and found him, but she brought Cell. So she was Arthur, and then Nick was Lancelot, and Cell was Merlin. And the way these dreams work is they have to, like, live out the memory, and then they can kind of pause it and have a conversation. There was a really, like, sweet moment where Cell and Nick were kind of reunited in that way, and they had this, like, forehead, like, it was nice. So Alice is in this world where in every other experience they've had in dream worlds, no one could, like, tell that she wasn't Arthur, and she was always in the same, like, either standing in for Arthur or she was Arthur. In this world, she kind of is also, but not really. So she's living this like memory, and she's watching Arthur, the actual Arthur, have a conversation with his sister, Morgana. I think it's Morgane in the book, but Morgana in the I don't know. I think Morgane or Morgana, I can't remember. I watched the show Merlin, and now I'm confused. But they're having the conversation about something, and she's talking about like the shadow guy, and then Alice, or why do I keep wanting to say Alice? Bree comes forward and she like touches something that they're holding, and they both go like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "You can see me," and so they're all fighting, and like things are not going great. But then all of a sudden, there was this like phrase thrown around by Arthur earlier in the books where it's like dragons never die or something, but somehow she ends up turning into kind of like a dragon in a way. I'm still kind of confused by that. It's like, I don't really know. But then Lancelot and Merlin show up, but it's not Lancelot and Merlin, it's Nick and Sel, and she's like, but I can't believe that it's really them, because that's how Arthur like kind of lost his mind in the first place or something. I'm just like seeing what I want to see and getting trapped in my memory. But it was them. Still don't quite know why she doesn't think it was them. I'm a little bit confused. I might be forgetting. But Sel is like, we gotta convince her that it's really us. And then Nick's like, but that'll do. And he's like, I know. She's worth it. And so he like does a thing, and then it proves that they are who she wants them to be. But in doing that thing, he loses his humanity. So the last of his like tie on humanity is kind of gone, and he's like full Shadowborn. And so Nick is there, and he kind of like, I think he like is unconscious. Sel's like unconscious or something. And so it's just Nick and Bree talking, and she's like, what are you guys doing here? And he's like, yeah, it's a long story. I'm still not sure I know the story. I don't think they say it. And she's like, but how do you know we can get out? And he's like, you'll know how to get out. And she's like, do I? So she's been in there for a period of time trying to get out, but she like only now realizes how she can get out, which is just to like deny the oaths to Arthur. This whole end was like a little confusing to me, but so she denies the oaths. She ends up taking her body back. And then she realizes they're like on a mini battlefield, so they've been like fighting for a bit or something, but she wasn't in her body for that. And so Alice, remember, she's like in a coma at this point, and they don't know if she's gonna wake up. And Sel is like unconscious, but he's full demon now, so that's problematic. And you know, they have Nick back, so that's good, because Nick, I guess when he found out, he could feel that like something bad happened to Sel, because that like link goes both ways. So he came back. He like called one of the people who I didn't really mention because they weren't that important to the story, but knew what was going on, and they brought him to where they were. And so Nick is also there. So they're all in one spot at least, but not reunited. So they're kind of like patching people up. She wakes up because I think she was either hurt or something. I don't know. And she kind of has this she realizes that everything that she's been doing like was because other people have been saying it's what she should be doing. So there have been different things throughout the story of like who she's supposed to be, to like her ancestors, you know, like the sword, the scion, the da-da-da-da-da. And she's like, I don't want to be any of those things. I just want to be me. So she like goes and burns the ancestral stream or something, and Vera's all angry, and she'd already denied Arthur. And she's like, but I'm still going to be more powerful than ever because I am me. And I don't know how that works, but I guess we'll find out. And then at the end of the book, she walks out and she's like, I knew it was you. And then it's Erebus who is there. And he's like, should be dead many times over. But we find out the reason he's not is because he's actually the Great Devourer / the Hunter / the leader of the Shadowborn, who's been like locked out of his kingdom or whatever, because that's what the memory she saw was just recently, was something about a crown, and they couldn't access the crown because I don't know, something happened. I'm still but she makes a deal because she's like, you know, apparently like when Vera was making her plea to the ancestors to keep her safe, he just sort of snuck in on that deal, and so every person in her family line has been cursed both by the deal and like just in general the blood marking. So the whole like lights she has on her body, the the pact deal with the demon is with him, like the demon. So she makes another deal, and she's like, how about you train me, like I'll go with you, basically, like you've been wanting us this whole time, because he's like, basically I'm waiting until you get really powerful, then I'm gonna just kill you and take the power. She's like, what if you train me to be really powerful, and I'll go with you, and in exchange you drop Cell off with his mom, because she's the only one who seems to know how to stop like the blood shadow demon curse thing. So she wants to help heal Cell, and she's like, I've been thinking I'm in the wrong place this whole time and feeling like I don't belong, and now I know I don't belong. And the demon guy's like, you know I'm gonna just kill you as soon as you get strong enough, right? And she's like, yeah, but let's do it anyway. So I guess her plan is to get strong enough and then kill him or something before he gets to kill her. So he takes Cell, drops him off with his mother, and then comes back, and then right before like he and Bree take off, Nick runs out, and he's like, and she's like, I'm sorry, but remember. They disappear, Shadow Guy takes her, end of book. I feel like I've gone posture-wise from like kind of professional to that teacher who sits on a desk and throws a textbook in the trash can. But to be fair, it's now 7:40 p.m. and I started filming today at like 1, so let's talk a bit about the positives in this story, because we finally finished the summary, and you can see why I'm upset that the third one is not yet here. And it's no one's fault but me own fault. I'm losing my mind. Because like I want this like training montage with the Demon King person. Like that sounds fun. But pros. I like that, similar to the trials in the first book, we don't linger too long in like her captivity situation. Like it's a pretty quick part of the book. I was sort of afraid when we were doing it that it was going to be one of those, and we're here for like a third of the book and we're like having conversations and she's trapped. But no, it's pretty fast, which is nice. I like how when she has this part where she gives herself up to Arthur, even though the whole time she's been fighting it, you almost get to see that re-victimization aspect where it's not obviously the same thing that happened to Tavira, but it's like an ancestor of Arthur, and then actually Arthur, who's like taking, because she even said earlier, like, don't do things with, like, in my body, or like, don't make me think things, or like whatever without my consent. And so when Arthur has been tricking her this whole time and then takes over her body and won't give it back, it's like you're getting a re-victimization, a comparison between her ancestor and what's happening to Bree in a way. So I just think that's really powerful. And I also like that that didn't go on for too long. I feel like it would have been really weird to get used to having Arthur in Bree's body. I'm going to stick with the pros and I'll get to the cons. I've said this before, I like that the consequences of her actions don't always affect her. So in the beginning, when like her sneaking out affects Cell as well, you know, like her getting in trouble was minimal compared to him who like lost his position and was then used as like a scapegoat to blame everything on. So I like that aspect just from a writing standpoint. Like as a writer, I appreciate that because you can see those consequences, and it's more powerful when it hurts the people that they care about than when they hurt themselves a lot of times in these sorts of stories. So I think that that was something really good that was done a couple of times. I like the whole like Shadow King thing, how, because she has this whole conversation when Erebus is like, how'd you know it was me? And she's like, I thought it was really weird after I was discovered to be Arthur that you, like the demon guy king, didn't show up, because in all the memories that I have of my ancestors, he was always like there, you know? And so you'd think after this big show of power, I was like, why is he not here? And then I was like, well, maybe actually it is someone who I know who's been here the whole time, and, you know, through other logicking finds out that it was this person. So I think that was kind of cool. And then I want to just give you a couple of lines I like before I get into my qualms, if you will. So on page 5, this one like gave me chills. So in the first book, the conversation, I think it was Vera specifically, she was having this conversation with Bree where she's like showing all of these, she sees all these memories of her ancestors who are in hiding and who are trying not to show their power because they're being hunted. But so then on page 5 we have, we ran so you would not have to. And I was like, that was really, it was give me chills. And then, so on 171, one of the ancestors that we saw the memories of, she was having this conversation in her own mind after an experience with someone who was treating her, I can't remember if it was the person who was just being really racist and treating her poorly, or if it was someone who was hunting her, but not like the hunter, just someone who was looking for her. But it was this whole thought where it's just like, not here, not today, but somewhere, someday. And then Bree reiterates it to the creepy mesmer guy. And she's just like, hey, not here, not today, but somewhere, someday. I'm like, ugh. It's like, so good. And then on page 479, his eyes on my face as he moves to my other cheek, kisses it lightly. Yes. It's not so much the wording, it's just that's around where she and Cell get together for the first time. Like, not, they just like smooch, you know, and it's a pretty like fireflies and the birthday, and I'm like, they're so cute. And he's like, she's like, but what about Nick? And then he's like, do you really think Nick would begrudge us this after everything? And it's not like one of those creepy things that it's like trying to validate cheating, because they're not really even together, Nick and Bree. They're like smooching in their dreams and whatever, but I don't think they're like together. But it's actually just one of those things where it's so complicated because they're all connected in so many ways. And like throughout this whole book, he's just been really supportive and like just trying to protect her. And even though they like argue a lot and they bicker, it's like all because they care about each other, and it's just a really bad situation. And it was just a really cute scene. And I'm trash. I'm sorry. I know I'm trash. But it was really cute. Okay, I'm moving on from that to the cons. So, I said this before, the whole thing about the impulsive protagonists and how I'm not a fan of people who make those sorts of decisions, which is like what happens in YA. So I'm going to breeze past that because I've already talked about it. Although I do want to say, I know that part of that is rooted in her character. So it's not the impulsivity, but she's a very strong character, and not in the way that we're seeing like strong female characters today, like not that kind of thing. Because actual strong female characters who are well-rounded, that's what we're talking about. She doesn't sit quietly, she speaks her mind, all of these things, and I would never begrudge anyone that. Never a character, never anyone in real life. But it was less of that and more like the teenage impulsivity where you're making decisions that you shouldn't make just because you don't really have, like, the impulse control. And I'm sure adult Bree wouldn't do those things, but it's just the nature of being a 16, 17-year-old character. And then there's the things that I was pointing out a little bit throughout the story towards the end mostly, where sometimes it just felt too convenient in some places for me, where it's like, oh, Bree used her powers in a bar thingy place where she shouldn't have, but it's okay because Alice is perceptive and noticed something and now it's all okay. Or, I don't know, just like the little things along the way, like, or in the dream at the end where she's like, oh, I now happen to realize all I have to do is to denounce Arthur when I couldn't have thought of that earlier. Like those sorts of things where it was just a little bit too convenient. It wasn't major, but there were just a few instances like that where I was like, okay. Oh yeah, and Mariah happening to work at the demon bar, those sorts of things. And then I think we only saw the ancestral stream like twice, maybe 3 times. But like one of them was to introduce the concept and one of them was to destroy it. And there might have been one time in the middle where she meets Vera in there, but I feel like we could have done more with that. Like I think that it was introduced and then we just didn't use it much. So I think that could have been more interesting. Like it was cool, the concept, but I just feel like we didn't use it enough throughout the story when we maybe could have. And then I was just a little bit confused at the end where she was in Arthur's memory, but then suddenly they could see her and then she became a dragon. Like it wasn't abrupt in that there was nothing around it that made sense, but there was just some things that I'm like, huh? And again, I know I was reading this late at night, so there's a chance that maybe I missed something, but if you understood it and I missed something, just let me know. down below, because there's a chance that that's what happened. I might have just misunderstood or like missed the thing. And it's like I said, he was saying throughout the story something about like dragons never die. Let me show you why dragons never die. But I feel like I still don't understand how that happened to work out. And the reason he was able to possess her when no other scion has ever like had this kind of like symbiotic relation, not symbiotic, that means it's a good thing, but they live in the same headspace kind of, is because she's also a medium, which is why that had to have happened, I guess. I don't know. There was just a lot sometimes for me. So those are most of my like notes, I guess. And I don't want to end this book on a negative note because I feel like there was so many positives in it. So I would like to just talk about a couple of random things before I wrap up. So one, I really liked the way that it addressed like sense of self. And this one, you know, I think that she did a really good job of having Bree kind of learn about her ancestral history and realize that sometimes she doesn't need to be anything but herself. Like, she doesn't need to owe her life to other people. And obviously, like, there are some ties that you don't want to break and some ties that are important. But, you know, she doesn't need Arthur. She doesn't need any of these things. She can just be who she is. So maybe the execution wasn't perfect, but I liked that that conversation was happening. I thought in the first book that was something that I was thinking about a lot, was like how it feels very tied to family lines, and sometimes families aren't healthy. And we did see that throughout the book, not just with Bree, but with other characters. So that was something that I appreciated a lot. And then I just wanted to talk really quickly about the relationship with Nick and Bree and Sel, because I have seen like different opinions about this online. I didn't know anything about this book series going into it. Like, I knew very little. I knew it was really well enjoyed. I know a lot of people who I like enjoy this book series, but I tried not to know too much about it because I wanted to go in kind of blind. So I've watched a few videos like after I finished it, and so I've seen different reactions, and one, there's like two videos that I would like to make, not just about this book, but in general. One is about the truth in love triangles, because this is a discourse happening, I know, on TikTok that also annoys me, is like how a love triangle, you have like the connection, where this one has the potential. I don't think it's gonna be that. It has the potential to be a love triangle, because like Sel is bisexual or something like that. He likes Bree, obviously, and he has admitted he was at one point in love with Nick, but he's not anymore. And he's like, I don't know if we really could ever be, which is fair. I'm not saying that they have to be, but this is like one instance where I can see there is potential for an actual, I mean, it wouldn't be a love triangle necessarily, because I don't know how Nick feels, but we just don't know. So it could be, and I would be chill if it was like ended up in a polyamorous situation. I don't know. I have a feeling it's not gonna do that, but I think it would be nice. I would also like to make a video on, you know, how I'm definitely not the only one who likes the darker characters, like the love interest who's like a little morally gray and just like grungy in a way. I don't know. It's just me being me. But he's like definitely not that bad compared to someone like the Darkling. Sel's like, psh, you know. So I would like to make a video, because I know that that's an interesting conversation to have as well, like the impact in YA specifically of having those characters be potential love interests. Maybe not in this specific case, but you know, how in books there have been more of those sorts of characters being love interests, and how we don't want to paint that as a good thing for readers when they're younger. And how, you know, I think that would just be a conversation worth having, so that was just something that I was thinking about. And there's a couple of other things, mostly about Sel. No, and it was mostly, like I said before, how it's up to you to decide, as the reader, whether or not Sel's actions have been too bad for him to be redeemed within this relationship, or if he's made up for those things. It's honestly an interesting conversation, and I think that it has to be taken on an individual level. And obviously in the real world, I think that it's different than in books. Like, if someone almost kills you with their hellhounds in real life, I would have a lot of questions. But yeah, I would not recommend that relationship. But in a book, I feel like it's just, I don't know, it feels different. So it's up to you, though, if you think that that is redeemable, no matter what he does and how much he supports her and all that. Like, if that action is too far to be redeemed, then, you know, that's a decision for the reader to make, I think. And so I guess towards the end of this, it's been an interesting experience because I do find myself very involved in reading books. Like, not that I don't think critically, I think I just don't let myself see all the little things that I have notes about until I'm sitting down and kind of writing up these scripts and having those conversations with myself. So I think that it's interesting just to like see it in that light and to take this sort of an approach to book reading, because I haven't done it in a really long time, something like this. So I've enjoyed this experience a lot, and I hope that you also enjoyed being here with me and my long-winded rants about the summaries. Oh my god, this video is probably really long. But thank you guys so much for sticking around. I hope that if I do a video maybe on book 3 when that comes out, maybe you'll come back. I am just hoping that you like this video. If you like this style of video or want me to do more of these sorts of things, I've got lots of books that I need to read and I'm presently reading, and I've just tried to get back into more aggressive, vigorous reading schedule because I have been slacking. So if this is something you like, let me know. If you got books to suggest, let me know. Like I said, I've got a lot of other videos that I'm either already posted or in the process of editing. So if you're interested in writing videos, reading videos, anything like that, if you have first lines you want me to look at, go into the description below. Let me know what you thought of these books, because I've seen mixed reviews, but most of them are positive. So let me know if you had criticisms that I missed or things you really loved that I didn't point out. And thank you guys so much for sticking with me through all of this. If you want to, please like and subscribe and hit the bell, and we can have more of these kinds of conversations. Follow me on TikTok at Scarlett_Ansley. All of my other information is down below. Thank you again so very much for being here, and until next time, sweet dreams.